Hello, everyone. Thanks very much for joining us for this session at BAASS Virtual Connect for safeguarding your business. My name is Nancy Lavery, and I'll be presenting along with my brother, Robert Lavery, and we want to show you a few products all around safeguarding your business. You know, the pandemic has forced us to change the way we're working. Transaction processes have gone virtual to adapt to fewer people being in the office and the need for paperless flows of information that can be accessed easily while maintaining your security and privacy. This session is going to discuss some of the key software solutions that can help you with compliance and illustrate how you can support remote workers and safeguard data in cost-effective ways. Before we get started showing you software, though, I'd like to hand it over to Rob to talk to you about some privacy legislation that if you're not aware of, you should be. Go ahead, Rob.
Thank you, Nancy. Yes, there's a privacy dilemma for small, medium enterprises brought on by new legislation that came out in 2018 called the Personal Information Protection and Electronic Documents Act, otherwise known as PIPEDA, which includes within it 10 fair information principles for organizations that are conducting commercial activities, which we believe is going to encompass 85 to 90% of the Sage 300 customer base. Within the legislation, they define what they call breach of security safeguards, which are the loss of, unauthorized access to, or unauthorized disclosure of personal information, which could include your AR customer, your AP vendor, and even your employee information held within the database of Sage 300. PIPEDA requires organizations to have in place physical, organizational, and technical security safeguards which are appropriate to the sensitivity of the information so that you avoid causing what they define as significant harm. Now, if a breach occurs, you must report that breach to the Office of the Privacy Commissioner of Canada. Failure to do so results in fines and other potential penalties. The reporting requirements include steps that you've taken as an organization to mitigate any future breaches and to mitigate the breach that has already occurred. So that might entail compensation or documenting procedures and policies, as well as approvals around how you're safeguarding and protecting the security and the privacy of the information that you're holding within Sage 300. So the goal for this session today is for Nancy and I to discuss some of these solutions that are available for Sage 300. Nancy?
Thanks very much, Rob. So when we talk about safeguarding your business, what do we mean? Typically, we're referring to putting auditable, automated processes into place. And there are different ways to safeguard your business. One way is to force the segregation of duties. In some cases, you can use Sage 300 security to grant users access to certain features, thereby limiting what they can do. But this may not always be the answer. You may have a department of employees that all do the same job. So you need to give them access, but you still want to safeguard against fraud, for example. With SOC Second Sight, you can grant users access to all features they need in Sage 300 and still force a segregation of duties. SOC Second Sight ensures at least 2 users participate in the creation and posting of batches, and that would be in accounts payable, in accounts receivable, and in the general ledger. Users have access to create and post transactions, but they can't do both. Meaning, if someone creates an entry in a batch, they cannot be the person to post that batch. This screen is what the installation screen looks like, and you literally just need to activate a checkbox to signify the batches that you want to force the segregation of duties against. Another way to safeguard your business is by forcing approvals around key processes. There are a lot of software solutions out there, but I'd like to focus this session on approvals around your AP payments. With SOX check approval, you can force an approval process around the creation of payments, and with document management link integrated, you can also attach and view the backup documentation. And the good news is the approvals take place outside of Sage 300, so your approvers do not need to log in, and in fact could do approvals from an iPad if they wanted to. When we look at Sage 300, with SOX check approval in place, we're forcing the approval around the creation of the payment batch. So you cannot post the batch or print checks until that batch has been approved. So nothing changes about the way you're entering payments in Sage 300, but you must submit that batch for approval. If I were to try to print the checks or post the batch, a message is going to pop up to tell me that it must be approved in order to do that. So the user will simply hit the submit for approval button. An email will go out to the approvers responsible for doing the approval. And once that approval takes place, it will automatically update Sage 300. While the approval process is in progress, the button will show that, so any users logging in will be able to see that that payment batch is in the process of being approved, and it will lock that batch so nobody can make changes to it while it's in the approval process. As I mentioned before, the approval console is accessed through your start menu, or you could run it on an iPad or a mobile device with the correct infrastructure. So when I log in as the general manager as my first level of approval, I'll be able to see the payments that have been submitted for approval. If you're running multiple Sage 300 companies, you can send those payments into one approval console for multiple companies, as I have here. You'll see a tree view with the company name and the batch that has been submitted for approval. But if we look at this BAASS Connect batch that I've created, I can see this payment that is sitting here waiting for approval. And with the document management link integration, I would be able to click on any of the documents within that batch and view the backup documentation related to that particular payment entry. Users can then approve those payments or choose to decline any payment within a batch if they don't want to process that payment at that particular point in time. So, you're not holding up an entire payment batch because there's one or two payments in there that you don't want to process at any given time. So it's simply a matter of clicking the approve button, and this will go ahead and update Sage 300 automatically or send an email to the next person that's responsible for doing the approval. My particular batch required 2 levels of approval, so we're going to log in now as the controller. Sorry, get rid of an L there. Log in as the controller, and we'll see that same batch, BAASS Connect 2021, with the payments that required approval from the controller. So again, we're going to go ahead and approve that. And automatically, the Sage 300 payment batch has been updated. So when we go back into Sage 300 for BAASS Connect 2021, I can now go ahead and print those checks and post the batch. So it automatically will release that batch. You can send an email notification to the person responsible for processing that batch, and you can then go ahead and process that batch. So that is the Tyrox check approval product with a document management link integration. So at this point, I'm going to pass it over to Rob, who will show you the EFT product.
Thank you, Nancy. And so now let's take a look once we have a posted and approved payment batch within accounts payable, the next step is to create an EFT file, whether that's an AP payment to vendors, or possibly a payroll run for our employees, or even an AR direct debit from customers. We want to be able to do that in a paperless way, but under proper security and privacy controls. To do that, we look at the setup options within EFT. You notice that one of the options is to allow unposted batches to be selected from within accounts payable in order to generate that EFT file of electronic payments to our vendors. What you've seen with the SOX check approval is that you cannot post the batch until it's been properly approved. So best practices would suggest that we say no to this option within EFT to ensure that only posted and therefore approved batches can be part of the electronic payment file to your vendors. And then what you do to safeguard the vendors who are receiving these payments is that you default the vendor status to entered rather than active. Because as you'll see, when we look at the setup of our EFT vendors, these vendors have to be given an active status in order for you to be able to perform an EFT transaction. So what you can do is you can safeguard the creation of EFT vendors by defaulting under the options a status of entered. And then what you do under the administrative services is you define a security group under EFT processing, which allows one person to set up the EFT vendor details, but another person to go in and do the approval on those vendor bank account details, thereby creating a segregation of duties and a proper security control safeguarding the vendor information as to who can set it up and who can approve it, and thereby only approved vendors can receive EFT transactions. Another way that we safeguard the information is to log the setup and approval of these EFT vendors. With the log that comes with EFT, you will see the information that's been set up for a particular vendor that includes a date and a timestamp and the name of the user within Sage 300 who set them up. Then we can also record the change in status from entered to active, which allows this vendor to start receiving EFT transactions. So by using the standard security groups within administrative services, we can safeguard that information. In addition to the vendor log, we also keep a log against every EFT payment transaction that's been set up within the system. So as you're generating these transactions, again, there's a date and a timestamp, but we'll also record the individual payments that are part of that batch, including the vendor information, the amount of the payment, and who set up that payment, as well as the bank against which we're going to be generating that payment file. And lastly, we also create a path and a file name for where that file is stored on the network prior to transmission to the bank. One of the ways that we transmit the files is by defining the EFT file path on the network, and then as a second step, we can segregate the person who generates the EFT file from the person who uploads the file into the bank website, because the website access is controlled through an ID and password. But some organizations don't want that to be two steps. So if your bank supports a secure file transfer protocol, SFTP as it's known, you can safeguard that transmission with a password if their bank supports this kind of automated upload procedure by providing a host name, their server where you can upload the file to, and a user ID and password. So by using the SFTP output destination rather than a folder on the network, you can generate the EFT file and upload it to the bank all in one step, but do so in a controlled fashion through the password control or through what the banks call a key file, which will identify the specific information that's required for the bank to verify that this is a proper EFT file upload. And this, of course, is in addition to the security that is put into an EFT file, such as hash totals and controls around the characters, which is based on the specification that's required in order for you to create the file and have it accepted by the bank. And then lastly, under the options, we can also encrypt the vendor bank information details. So as you're generating remittance advices, the information about their bank account and financial institution number is protected through the encryption procedure. And that will be on the screen within EFT as well as on the remittance advice form itself. And then if you're going to be emailing these remittance forms to your vendors, you can also protect who can open up that remittance advice with the email by requiring a password that you set up a password formula for. So this ensures that only the appointed person within your vendor would be able to open up the remittance advice attachment to the email, safeguarding that information as well. So this summarizes the controls around security and privacy to maintain the integrity of your vendor's bank account details, which vendors can be paid, and when you're going to process those payments, who within your organization is able to set up those payments and actually transmit them to the bank. Because there are other transaction reports, such as the payment transfer details, that will then also provide an environmental or organizational control outside of the system, where you can match the information that was transferred to the bank as part of your EFT file with the posting journal within accounts payable and the report that you get back from the bank. So this would be more of an environmental control where you can match up the 3 different reports to ensure that they all match exactly. And then you've got assurance that the system is safeguarding the information and the payments that you've approved within accounts payable are what got sent to the bank through the EFT system, but also then were processed correctly by the bank. So that ends the formal part of the presentation. I'll throw it back to Nancy to complete the presentation today. Nancy?
Thanks very much, Rob. So we've given you some ideas around how you can safeguard your business and shown you some software that will allow you to put auditable, automated processes in place. Just to summarize, we've talked about SOX Second Sight that can help you with the segregation of duties, SOX Check Approval with the document management link integration to put approvals around your AP payments, and EFT for you to be able to send electronic payments to your bank. So at this point, if you have any questions, you can put those into the chat window within GoToMeeting, and one of your BAASS representatives can get you the answer to any questions you may have. So thank you very much for taking the time with us today. You will be able to visit the BAASS Connect website for copies of this presentation, and we hope you enjoy the rest of your day.